I had been single for about 6 months when I decided to download Tinder again, mostly just out of boredom and a desire for some human interaction that didn't involve my immediate circle of friends or coworkers. After swiping for a few days through a sea of generic profiles, I matched with a girl named Marin, who seemed perfectly normal and down-to-earth, with a profile full of hiking photos, local travel spots, and standard interests. We moved the conversation to text fairly quickly, and after a week of consistent chatting where she seemed engaged and rational, we agreed to meet up at a local upscale restaurant on a Thursday evening to see if the chemistry translated in person. The date started off fine, with the usual small talk about our daily jobs and our favorite movies, but things took a sharp and uncomfortable turn when the topic of past relationships came up in the middle of our second round of drinks. Marin leaned in closer over the small wooden table, her voice dropping to a near whisper that felt strangely intimate, and asked me how I was truly doing since my breakup with a girl named Sarah. I froze for a second with my cup halfway to my mouth because I hadn't mentioned Sarah's name once during our entire week of texting, nor was her name listed anywhere on my current social media profiles, which I keep strictly private. When I asked her with a forced laugh how she knew my ex's name, Marin just laughed it off with a casual shrug, claiming I must have mentioned it in passing while we were messaging late one night. I knew for a fact I hadn't, as I am always very careful about what I reveal to strangers online, but I tried to stay calm and rational, assuming maybe we had a mutual friend or some distant connection I'd forgotten about. But then she casually mentioned the small crescent-shaped scar Sarah has on the very back of her neck from a childhood accident with a chain-link fence, describing it with unsettling accuracy. That specific detail was something you could only see if you were standing directly behind Sarah, or if she had specifically pointed it out to you, which she rarely ever did, even to close friends. I felt a cold knot of dread form in the pit of my stomach, as I realized this wasn't just a lucky guess or a mention from a mutual acquaintance, but something far more invasive. I tried to keep my voice steady while my hands began to tremble under the table, asking Marin again where she got that information, but her expression didn't change from a pleasant, vacant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Instead of answering my question directly, she casually brought up the heated argument Sarah and I had in our private kitchen 3 nights before we officially called it quits on the relationship. She quoted a specific, emotionally charged sentence I'd said, something about feeling like we were constantly being watched in our own home, word for word, as if she had been standing in the room with us. My blood went cold, and my skin began to crawl, because that argument happened behind closed doors with no windows open, and no one else around to hear our private breakdown. I didn't even bother to say goodbye or make an excuse about the time. I just stood up abruptly, threw some crumpled cash on the table for our meal, and walked out the door as fast as my legs could carry me. As I hurried across the dark parking lot to my car, I glanced back through the restaurant window and saw Marin still sitting perfectly still, staring at the empty seat I'd just occupied with a terrifying intensity. She wasn't looking at her phone, taking a sip of her drink, or even blinking. She was just staring with that same unmoving, wide-eyed expression that made her look like a mannequin. When I finally got home and locked every entrance, I immediately blocked her number and deleted my Tinder account, but the oppressive feeling of being watched didn't go away for weeks. I spent the rest of that night checking the deadbolts on my doors and peering through the tiny slats of my blinds, wondering how long she had really been following me and Sarah before the breakup. I realized then that our chance match on the app was likely anything but random, and that she had been orchestrating this encounter from the very beginning. I haven't been on another date since that night, and I've recently moved into a new house on the other side of the city, just to put some distance between me and that memory. I still think about that argument in the kitchen, and how Marin knew exactly what was said in the absolute privacy of my own home, which still gives me chills. It's a terrifying and constant reminder that some people don't just want to date you or get to know you. They want to inhabit every secret corner of your life until there's nothing left for yourself. I'm a frequent and experienced user of Facebook Marketplace because you can often find high-quality vintage furniture for a fraction of the retail price if you are patient and check the listings constantly. Last month, I saw a listing for a mid-century modern oak TV stand that usually retails for well over $800 in high-end boutiques, but the seller was only asking for $20. The description provided was extremely brief, stating they were moving out of the state and simply needed it gone by the end of the night, which is a common and usually believable tactic for quick sales. I messaged the seller, a guy named Arthur, and he responded almost instantly with a short message, giving me an address about 30 minutes away in a rural part of the county. Before leaving the house, I pulled up the listing one more time to show my roommate the photos of the piece we were supposedly getting, just to make sure he liked it. There were 3 pictures in the ad, one of the front, one of the side, and one showing it placed in a large, windowless room with very distinct, dark floral wallpaper that looked quite expensive. Something about the third photo felt slightly off to me, so I zoomed in as much as I could to look at the reflection in a nearby window that was visible in the background of the shot. The window showed a very clear view of the exterior of a house that looked exactly like the one Arthur had sent me the address for in his initial message. However, the angle of the reflection suggested the room was located in a part of the house that didn't seem to exist according to the building's exterior shape and its surrounding trees. I dismissed the observation as a simple trick of the light or a weird camera angle and drove out to the location, which turned out to be a sprawling, older property tucked behind a dense and overgrown tree line. Arthur met me at the front door, and he was a tall, gaunt man who seemed incredibly nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder toward the dark hallway behind him. He told me in a low voice that the TV stand was in the back room and led me through a confusing maze of dimly lit, narrow corridors that smelled of damp wood. As we walked deeper into the house, I kept an eye out for that specific floral wallpaper I'd seen in the marketplace photos, but every room we passed had plain, peeling white paint and bare floors. We finally reached the very back of the house, and Arthur pointed to a heavy wooden door that was reinforced with several industrial deadbolts on the outside, which seemed excessive for a simple bedroom. He unlocked them one by one with a slow, deliberate metallic clicking, and as the door creaked open, the first thing I saw was that exact dark floral wallpaper from the ad. I stepped inside the room to inspect the stand, but as I did, I realized the room had no actual windows at all, which completely contradicted the photo I'd analyzed so carefully earlier. Then I looked at the wall where the window should have been, and saw a large, framed high-definition picture of the house's exterior, hanging there instead of real glass. The reflection in the marketplace photo wasn't a reflection of the outside world at all. It was a carefully staged shot meant to make the room look like a normal, safe part of the house. I turned around quickly to ask Arthur about the strange setup, but he was no longer standing in the open doorway. He was already pulling the heavy door shut from the outside with a sudden, violent force. I lunged forward with everything I had and managed to get my shoulder in the narrow gap, forcing it back open before he could engage the exterior deadbolts. He didn't even try to stop me once I pushed past him, and I ran through the corridors, out of the house, and back to my car, peeling out of the driveway while my heart hammered against my ribs. I called the police once I was a safe distance away from the property, and they later discovered that the back room was a completely soundproof chamber built into a hidden annex that wasn't on the original blueprints. They found several other active listings on Arthur's account for high-end items at impossibly low prices, all using that same soundproofed room as a backdrop for the photos. It turns out Arthur wasn't moving at all. He was looking for people who wouldn't be missed, lured in by a deal that was literally too good to be true. I've been trying to grow my YouTube channel for a couple of years now, mostly by doing late-night just chatting streams, where I just hang out and talk to my small but loyal group of viewers. Since I live in a relatively small and noisy apartment, I set up my studio in the unfinished basement of the building to avoid disturbing my neighbors during my late-night sessions. It's a bit creepy down there with the exposed rusted pipes and the flickering overhead lights, but the acoustics are surprisingly great, and the rent for the storage space is cheap. One Tuesday night, I was about 2 hours into a particularly high-energy stream when my webcam started acting up, glitching and cutting to a solid black screen for a few seconds at a time. I laughed it off for the audience, telling the live chat that the basement ghosts were finally coming for me after all these months, and continued with my planned story. But when the video feed finally stabilized after a longer than usual blackout, the chat, which usually moved at a steady and manageable pace, suddenly exploded with hundreds of identical messages. Nearly every single person in the chat was typing, "Don't end the stream," or "Keep the lights on," in all caps, which I initially took as a coordinated joke or some kind of weird new meme. I asked them what the big deal was with a nervous grin, and one of my regular moderators messaged me privately on my phone, telling me in no uncertain terms to look at the recorded frames from the blackouts. He said that when the screen went black, the low ambient light from my secondary monitor revealed something the camera couldn't normally see in the shadows. I pulled up the video on demand on my second screen while still live and scrolled back to the first major glitch, pausing the recording exactly where the feed cut to total digital black. In the faint reflection of my glasses and the dark monitor behind me, I could clearly see a figure standing in the open doorway of the laundry room directly behind my chair. It wasn't a solid person. It looked more like a tall, distorted and pitch-black silhouette with elongated limbs and a pale, featureless face that seemed to absorb the light. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as I realized the entity only appeared on the camera sensor during those specific moments of digital darkness or signal loss. I looked back at the live chat, and the panic was rapidly escalating, with people begging me not to turn around or turn off the stream under any circumstances. They claimed in frantic messages that as long as the eyes of the viewers were actively on me through the lens, the thing in the doorway wouldn't move any closer to me. I tried to keep talking to the camera to maintain the connection, my voice shaking and cracking as I watched the glitches become more frequent and last for much longer durations. During a particularly long 5-second blackout, the figure moved from the laundry room doorway to the far corner of the basement, only about 10 feet from where I sat in my gaming chair. I could hear a faint, wet scratching sound coming from that dark corner, even though the actual video feed showed nothing but an empty and silent basement. Realizing I couldn't stay there for another second, I grabbed my laptop and kept the stream running with the front-facing camera as I slowly backed toward the stairs leading to the main floor. The chat was screaming at me to keep the camera pointed behind me at all times, and I could see the silhouette in the dark frames getting closer with every flicker of the screen. I finally reached the heavy door at the top of the stairs, slammed it shut, and bolted it from the apartment side, ending the stream only once I was safely inside my locked unit. The next morning, I went back down into the basement with a friend for safety and found deep, rhythmic scratches in the concrete floor, exactly where the figure had been standing in the video. I never streamed from that basement again, and I eventually moved out of that building entirely after hearing similar scratching sounds coming from under my floorboards late at night. To this day, I can't look at a black computer screen or a monitor in sleep mode without wondering if something is standing right behind me, waiting for the light to fail.